Welcome to the new location for frequent press interactions. Welcome to members of the public joining us in the usual interaction. This is a post-cabinet situation where I hope that from here on in, now that we are fully into the post-COVID period, all the disruptions that we entertained in the last 2 years, we are hoping to shake them off one by one. We're fully back into occupancy here at Whitehall, and we hope that we can, on a more regular basis, have our post-cab meetings like this, which will give you the opportunity to talk to us, encouragingly, I hope, and we on this side to tell you what we have been up to, what we intend to do. So today, I don't propose to keep you too long, but just to touch on a few things. I haven't been in front of you for a couple of weeks. There's a lot happening which involves my attention, and so I've been busy outside of the country or buckled down to some important developments. We are at a stage where we are trying to ensure that we catch up and come up to speed after the disruptions that we've had in the period 21-22. Today I want to just mention that we are very pleased that the assignment that we've had for the last, since 2018 going forward, and our difficulties with trying to get a supply of gas from Venezuela, we are one step closer to that. As you know, you would have seen that after our extensive efforts both at home and abroad, and also in Venezuela nearby, that we have got, firstly, we got people to listen to us and to lobby for us in Washington. I must say that we do have a lobbyist group in Washington hired by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. They've been on this job for quite some time, actually. But they did a wonderful job when we sought to speak to the people in the United States who need to hear our story. And our lobbyists were able to open a number of doors for us. And during that period, you would have seen both myself and Minister Young meeting people and, in fact, building relationships so that they would listen to us. And we got very many people on both sides of the aisle at virtually every level. At the end of the day, by the time we got to the Summit of the Americas, we did get the ear of the President of the United States and the Vice President. And you would have seen where, arising out of those contacts, we have an ongoing arrangement now where the Vice President meets with CARICOM on a fairly regular basis, and we have continuous contact. And of course, we've got a very active ambassador who is very keen to assist Trinidad and Tobago. So we've been fortunate to have that. And we had met with virtually anybody who would listen to our case. And I must say, by and large, bar one person who shall remain nameless, we had very good reception from people who listened to Trinidad and Tobago and our requirement to be treated and to be considered in a particular way. So we got, while the sanctions remain on Venezuela, we didn't expect that we could have got the United States to change its foreign policy with respect to the sanctions. So what we've been fighting for all along is for what we call a carve-out, an exemption, to give us, allow us to proceed with our business without falling to the penalties of the sanction. That, I must tell you, was a very heavy lift, because in some people's book that was not on. But our persistence and lobbyists, the friends who spoke on our behalf, we built up relationships with people like Chief Whip Jim Clyburn, the former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Greg Meeks. You would have seen Hakeem Jeffries coming here. We built up those relationships along the way, and I think they will serve Trinidad and Tobago well going forward, because we are now as active as we've ever been with respect to our diplomacy, relationships, and business contacts. So following from that, when we got the carve out, it came with some conditions. We always felt that it was a two-hour multi-step program, and the Venezuelans weren't entirely enamored by the restrictions that were placed on, because as you would expect, there are strong sentiments in the United States which did not believe that the thing to do was to put money in the Venezuelans' pocket. Even though one would hear complaints about how bad things are in Venezuela. The bottom line is that these geopolitical or bilateral pressures are not usually the last word. They're usually always subject to negotiations. And we would have seen now the fly in the ointment, which is the Venezuelan election, is now in front of us. Stories about elections and who will run and who wouldn't run. Those are the news-making items these days. In the meantime, we did get, by further action and further representation, the United States has now agreed that we can do straight-up commercial arrangements with Venezuela, in that we get our gas and we pay for it as per the terms of our term sheet, and some other minor adjustments like humanitarian considerations and so on. But the bottom line is the door is open for commercial arrangements. Minister Young is currently on a week's vacation. He has a well-earned 1-week family vacation. As soon as he gets back here, he will be on his way to Caracas to complete the dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the term sheet. And in the meantime, Shell, our operating partner, will be moving full speed ahead on the technical side of things. I hope I'm asking you to appreciate that it's not everything we can tell you at this stage, because these commercial arrangements are subject to certain confidentialities. And I trust that as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, where we have been engaged in this business now for decades, that you'll appreciate that there's nothing special about that. It's just the way the business is. You're out there competing with other people, and there are certain things you need to keep to your chest if you are going to not give up your advantage. And we will do nothing to give up the advantage of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It's, as some people would say, it's business. So if you have questions and we can answer them, we will. But if we can't answer them in some of the detail that you might like, understand that it's because we want to preserve our interests. So very soon we expect to close off that negotiation, and the last thing to happen is for the license to operate. When all parties are satisfied with the conditions, then a license to operate would be issued. We have the commitment from President Maduro that the license would be issued, so we just have to see when that happens, and we work towards that point. When that would have happened, I want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand that this is not today for tomorrow. This is for the long term. Because if we in Trinidad and Tobago do not discover major fields to replace what we are consuming on a daily basis, and if we don't get access where the gas exists, we are going to be forced to accept a significant reduction in our fortunes. I could tell you that the best earning period for Trinidad and Tobago in the hydrocarbon business was in the period between 2007 and early 2009, where our earnings in 2008 was in fact when we built most of our heritage fund. And as a matter of fact, at that time, many people thought that the good times would roll like that permanently, refusing to understand that we are enjoying the quality of life that we enjoy now because we are consuming a wasting resource. At that time, we were consuming on a daily basis approximately 4.2 billion cubic feet of gas. And that volume was large but we were in the low end of the earning part of the market because the arrangements in place, we were referenced against Henry Hub in the United States, which is the lowest of the markets. But because of the large volume that we were producing at the time, our earnings were significant. And during that period, the NGC built up a chest, reserves of approximately $20 billion that they had in their account, their bank account. And they could have spent money on further investment, produced some for the Minister of Finance on an ongoing basis and so on. But over time, there's very fields that we are extracting that volume of gas from. You get less and less and less. The pressures are lower and lower. So understandably, there's going to come a time when you can't have it. It's not being, no new gas is being made in the field. You're just taking what is there. So we're now down to about 2.6 BCF per day. But fortunately, we were successful in renegotiating our take. So while our volumes are low, our earnings have not dropped significantly because the mechanism by which we earn was changed. We had some significant discussions with the main players, Shell and BP in particular, and as a result of that, we were able to have the referencing done not only on the low point of Henry Hub, but a basket of prices, the European basket, the European price, the Asian price, and Henry Hub, and the average in there is where we now reference our pricing. So when you see Henry Hub at $2, it doesn't mean that we're getting $2. Europe might be $16, and Japan might be 10, and so that's where we are. And contrary to what you were told in the beginning, that we didn't know what we were doing, thank God we knew what we were doing and that we were successful in those negotiations. As I told you from day one, I appoint myself the country's #1 salesman, and it took the effort of the government and Minister Young's presence in the cabinet, in the office of the Prime Minister, was very instrumental in providing the teamwork that was required to stay the course and to convince those who make those decisions, because it was always the government's position that we will take these issues to the places where the decisions are made. So we didn't deal with BP Trinidad and Tobago or Shell Trinidad and Tobago. We took our case to BP London, to the boardroom. We took our case to Melbourne, where the decision was made, and that's how we ended up with a decision to get the Ruby field financed, and of course Shell as a partner in the matter with Dragon and Loran Manatee. We also, along the way, worst case scenario, for about 15 or 17 years we were talking about Loran Manatee, which is on the border where we have 27%, and Venezuela has the rest of it. But nothing came out of that because we were pursuing an approach of unitization, where both countries have to agree and both countries will do it together. Of course, that never happened. So what we did was get agreement with Venezuela for us to proceed alone to extract our 27% in Manatee. That is proceeding apace, and we expect that the day will come when we'll extract. You would also have seen that in the discussions that have taken place in Caracas in recent times, it was President Maduro himself who would have mentioned that Loran, which is the Venezuelan portion of Loran Manatee, which is 73% of that field, is something that we can do business on. It is not unusual, if you look around the world, to see situations when neighboring countries, country A has an economy that is based on resources from country B. As a matter of fact, the Japanese economy, which is one of the strongest in the world, is based on resources coming from other countries. And that country grew to the point where at one point it's the second largest economy in the world. In Europe, it's common where you get a lot of cross-border resources coming from one country to another. So it is nothing new for us if we rely going forward in the medium and the long term on raw materials coming from Venezuela. We have a small business in Trinidad and Tobago now where there are a couple of sawmills, at least one or probably two of them, doing business, producing wood products. That is being supported by logs coming in from Venezuela. We import timber from the United States so that the sawmills can operate. So if we get on to the point where we are extracting gas from Venezuela to feed the plants in Trinidad and Tobago, that would have been the most successful thing that we would have done after discovering gas within our own borders. And the future that we will not give up in with respect to the climate change and the need to get out of the hydrocarbon industry. Trinidad and Tobago's position, publicly stated at fora abroad and here home, is that as long as there is a hydrocarbon business in the world and we have hydrocarbons, we will extract it and we will market it. We will also take steps, as we are taking, to reduce our carbon footprint by investing in some sustainable energy. As we're doing now, we have a plant, 112 megawatts under construction right now, and some more to come later on. But we will not abandon our hydrocarbon opportunities. And when one looks at diversification of the economy, as we have been hankering after for a long time, we can't but accept that there are very few things that we can realistically do that can, at least in the short and medium term, give us the kinds of returns that we get from hydrocarbons. So we'll do all and get the benefit of all, including hydrocarbons, mainly gas. In fact, we support the idea, and we are one of the mouthpieces in selling the idea that gas is the clean energy that's available now, and it certainly is the transitional energy. So in this period of transition, away from hydrocarbon to something else, that period of transition, natural gas is the best. So we remain in that business. We did have a crime symposium here, CARICOM, where we declared our interest in treating violent crime as a public health issue. And in that conversation, we did make certain requests of the United States to work with us more closely in suppressing the criminal business that operates between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States. There are people in the United States who are marketing to our criminal element here and others the guns and ammunition that manufacturers would like to sell up there. And the criminal element see the opportunity for that business, and they have been working overtime, stressing out all of us in this country, forcing us to fund a national security apparatus that is now probably the second or the third largest component of our budget. In 1 year, it became the largest component of the budget. And we decided to talk to the United States about it, and we've been doing that. Fortunately, again, I can tell you that the US has been listening to us, and they've made some significant adjustments to assist us in coping with the fight against the criminal element. And we are very grateful for that kind of a cooperation. And we are already seeing some of the results of that. I could mention to you that as I speak to you now, we, as part of our strengthening of our border arrangements, which we have to work on all the time because, as you know, we have a marine border all around us, Trinidad, all around Tobago, and notwithstanding our best efforts, persons who attempt to penetrate us from time to time would succeed, and we keep strengthening it. And we plan to improve our northern and eastern patrolling capacity by having a more up-to-date and modern facility in Tobago. And we did ask the United States to help us in the technical side of that. And as soon as that is over, the government of Trinidad and Tobago will move towards constructing a more modern and effective Coast Guard presence in Tobago, not in the northern part of Tobago, probably in the northwest. And we currently have technical people from the United States in Tobago today, helping us to select the site and to also move forward with the design and the construction. When we do get that, it would make it much easier and more effective for us to patrol one of the areas where we do get some significant unauthorized entry, the north coast of Trinidad, the east coast of Trinidad, and of course all around Tobago. And of course we are receiving a lot of training opportunities, and we did get some small craft from the United States, and we are moving towards having our vetted staff in the police service interact with and share information on crime fighting with the United States agencies and their personnel. All of this can only be to the good of the people of Trinidad and Tobago's safety and security. We also had recently an outcome on something that we've been working on for quite some time, which is a summit between Canada and CARICOM. We met with Prime Minister Trudeau in Barbados first, when that idea first came up that we should be working more closely together. And it was Canada's position that it was a good idea and was willing to work with us. We in CARICOM also have been taking the position that we are stronger together and we are more respected when we speak with one voice. And you probably would have seen that CARICOM has been speaking with one voice and being more collaborative and greater camaraderie among the CARICOM leaders in sharing the workload that we've been assigned and so on. And then after Barbados, we met again in Bahamas, where we buckled down to dealing with this issue of this calamity that's unfolding in Haiti on a daily basis. And we decided that there was to be a CARICOM Canada summit, and Canada was detailed to organize it, and it was organized, and we have since been there. I must tell you, it was very useful, and we did take the opportunity to lay down a number of plans where our common interests can be better served working together. And you would have seen the communique that came out of that, and Dr. Brown, if you talk to him when he's at his own podium, he will give you all the fine details of that. But suffice it to say that the relationship between Canada and CARICOM has been considerably strengthened. We have a lot of common positions, and Canada has, if not volunteered, but agreed as per our request to work with us on a number of things, not the least of which is the whole area of safety and regional security, trade, training, education, and so on. A number of things that we can look to Canada for, and that relationship that is of long standing, we believe that it can be strengthened. And we have some problems in the international environment. For example, the whole question of the de-risking of our regional banks, which is still going on. That Canada's voice in support of us and in defense of our position is something very useful. And Canada, being part of the G77, has offered to talk alongside and for CARICOM as we defend ourselves from persons who keep moving the goalposts and making it almost, if not impossible, but very difficult for us to participate in the world's economy in areas where we can benefit. You would have heard of these banking arrangements where there are all kinds of penalties for risks in doing business with people like us because the risk is too great. And the banks are saying, well, look, we don't want to do any business with you because if something goes wrong, we will get fined, and the fines are huge. So the best thing to do is not to do any business with you. So thank you very much, and we're out the door. A number of CARICOM countries are facing that. Only recently, 2 countries have lost their correspondent banking relationships with major banks that have been with them for a long time. We in Trinidad and Tobago, we have not lost any, but we are not immune, because once they start with that kind of behavior, we are not immune. As a matter of fact, we did have to argue our way out of this situation once, where we were accused of being involved in offshore banking, unregulated offshore banking. I mean, that was something that we had to deal with very firmly from its source. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and we're very happy to have Canada as a partner in us trying to defend ourselves from these kinds of uncertainties and oppressive actions of the rest of the world. So we did have the Summit of the Americas, from which we did get some significant benefits, and that's going on in our relationship, as I mentioned a while ago, with the United States. We've just finished the summit with Canada, and there's another summit coming up in next month, which is a CARICOM Saudi Arabia summit. As you may know, Saudi Arabia is one of the countries in the world which has a huge investment fund, which they do major investments around the world. And we in CARICOM, one of the things that we are always short of is an inflow of foreign direct investment. So Saudi Arabia's interest in CARICOM in recent times have been increasing. We have been encouraging it, and they've already made significant commitments across CARICOM. Trinidad and Tobago, we have been in touch, and we are part of the discussions, and they've arranged with CARICOM a summit that is to take place. As I speak to you now, it's being finalized, but I've seen the savinggram today that the confirmation of this CARICOM Saudi summit in Riyadh is to take place on the 16th of November. I have been it was my intention, it remains my intention to go to the COP meeting in Dubai, which is a little later on towards the end of November, just beyond that period. But I am going to do both. I will attend to the summit because I didn't want to have to be the reason why it was going to be rescheduled or possibly postponed, because my other CARICOM colleagues are eager to have it. And so we're going to have it on the 16th, which would mean that I probably would have to leave here on the 14th, because getting there is probably about a good day and a half. But Trinidad and Tobago would be present. I would be leading a delegation to this summit in Saudi Arabia. But because of how it has come relatively quickly and suddenly, our bilateral relationships and discussions, which were quite advanced with Saudi Arabia, will continue after the summit. So I will remain in Saudi Arabia for a couple of days after the summit, where Trinidad and Tobago and Saudi Arabia bilaterals will continue. We would be meeting with some significant potential interests for a while, and I will have with me Minister Brown, Minister Young, and maybe one other person to conclude those discussions. We have at the Ministry of Transportation, Minister Sinanan and his team, they are quite advanced with some arrangements with respect to international air travel, because as you know, some of the biggest businesses in air travel today are the airlines coming out of the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. So we are hoping to find some common ground in there with some CARICOM Western interests. So that work is going on, and you'll hear more about that as we proceed. And then after that, the COP comes up, which is where we're going to be talking about climate change and who pays for what and who should do what and who shouldn't do what. Trinidad and Tobago has a vested interest in those discussions, and I would lead our delegation there. Those meetings go on for very many days, but I would be there only for the high-level discussions, which might be 2 or 3 days. They have not yet finalized which 3 days those are, but they usually come at the beginning. Or not the beginning, well, somewhere close to the beginning, but there are meetings before, but I'll get there. So after the Saudi visit, I'll go to Dubai for the COP visit. And then when that is over, I go to London with Minister Young, and we meet to close off the work that we've been doing with the restructuring of Atlantic LNG. The restructuring of Atlantic LNG is one of the most significant things that this government would have done. It was, again, like others, it was not easy, but I think we were able to convince the principals that Trinidad and Tobago's interest has to come first, but certainly not last. And we have spent the last 2.5 years on this exercise, and we have now concluded it. And the signing of that is to take place with Shell one day and BP in London. And we do have new business which we are to discuss with two other companies after. So on the 4th, 5th, and 6th, we would be having these very significant meetings and signings in London. So between mid-November and the 7th of December, some very significant decisions would be finalized or initiated with respect to the people, their interests, and economy of Trinidad and Tobago. There, not very many people pay too much attention to these discussions and these decisions, but they are far-reaching. I mean, without the restructuring of Atlantic LNG, our earning capacity would have been significantly hampered, degraded going forward. As you know, when we had the 4 trains running, the government's shareholding in Train 1 was 10%, and we had 11% in Train 4. We had no shareholding in Trains 2 and Trains 3. Train 1 being the oldest, when the gas availability became a problem and we got into a period of gas curtailment, the other owners of Train 1 decided that Train 1 had to be withdrawn. There wasn't enough gas to run 4 trains. But of course, if you were not running 4 trains, and they had all the shareholding in Train 2 and Train 3, you know what that meant for us. So we in Trinidad and Tobago, you would have seen some of our parliamentary colleagues talking about things they didn't know anything about Train 1, and some of them were even jumping up and down with glee to hear that Train 1 was going to be closed down. And of course, you just pity those folks. What we did was to make sure that we kept Train 1 on the table so that we would have a seat at the table, so that we could negotiate, and rather than negotiate for a funeral, we negotiate for a christening. As a result of what we did with Train 1, we were able to change the shareholding in the restructured LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago, where the government of Trinidad and Tobago now will have a shareholding of 10% in the entire business. And I leave you to figure that out. From being stuck with a dying Train 1, 11% in Train 4, we now have 10% across Trains 2, 3, and 11% in Train 4. And if my colleagues in the parliament can't figure that out, then you try and figure them out. That is one of the most significant decisions that we've been able to accomplish. And when you add that to the fact that we now have a different formula on which the pricing is done and our earning is done, that is what is saving us right now, ladies and gentlemen. Without those 2 decisions, the future of Trinidad and Tobago would have been quite bleak. And if I say so myself, if I've done nothing for this country to take us to this position, I'm satisfied that my living has not been in vain. So basically, those are the developments to take place. We have some interesting developments elsewhere around the world, far away from us, but not disconnected from us. The developments in the Middle East are very worrisome. Like everybody else, we are hoping that that war between Hamas and the Israelis doesn't spread, because it will do nobody any good if that infection spreads to other parts of the human body. Just to make it clear to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the position of Trinidad and Tobago on that matter remains the same. It is that we support the 2-state policy, where peace and sustainable development can come to the people of the Middle East, Israel and its neighbors, recognizing Israel's right to exist, and also the right of the Palestinians to a state of their own. That is Trinidad and Tobago's position. That was our position. That is our position, war or no war, because we believe it is the only option of all the options available that provide any possibility for a recession of the hostility and the hatred to be replaced by peaceful coexistence. And you also would have probably been paying attention to some noises coming from Venezuela with the concerns of Guyana. Principles remain the same. Trinidad and Tobago's foreign policy is based on the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, the same principles that we use to protect Venezuela's right to self-determination about its elections in the face of sanctions and threats of invasion. Those same principles we use now with Venezuela in its treatment with Guyana, that we believe that our region is a zone of peace, and we are all better off living in a zone of peace, respecting international law and respecting the rights of our neighbors. We're better off and stronger together when those are the principles. Trinidad and Tobago, we are proud of our foreign policy, our diplomatic initiatives. As I speak to you now, the statement as made today in the face of this calamity in the Middle East was chaired by our Ambassador Francis, who is President of the United Nations. We didn't get there by being wishy-washy or by not knowing our past or not knowing what future we are not prepared to surrender. So if you have any questions, I take them now, and we can meet here again as often as you would like. But of course, when you come, you'd meet all the ministers eager to utilize this new space that we have at Whitehall. Any questions? Just identify yourself and place them to us.
I have two questions. The opposition leader has come out in support of Guyana on the whole dispute with Venezuela. What is your view on that?
The one thing that our opposition has done with respect to our foreign policy is to either undermine it or make a fool of themselves. I don't know what position they will have, but I could tell you, Trinidad and Tobago's position is a CARICOM position. There's a CARICOM position on the Guyana issue, and we are rooted there. I wouldn't be surprised if the opposition comes out with any position that could be anything. They have done human service when trying to undermine our foreign policy, and I don't know that their support of Guyana is what is required. It is Trinidad and Tobago. Guyana is our neighbor. Venezuela is our neighbor. There are two friendly states. Guyana is part of CARICOM, and we have a CARICOM position on the issue with Venezuela. And I think that is where Trinidad and Tobago is. And fortunately, Trinidad and Tobago is not judged or is not dependent on any opposition position. Otherwise, right now, we would have been somewhere with President Guaido or sanctioned by the United States for trying to defend our interests.
Do you agree with the opposition leader's position that the destruction of emblems in Hindu temples and so on is not an indication of religious intolerance in Trinidad and Tobago?
I must say it's not very often that I agree with the opposition leader, but on this occasion, I can't take issue with much of what she said, because what she said is basically the facts. And I would want to discourage people who would want to use the instances of criminal activity against places of worship to portray that as the state of play in Trinidad and Tobago. One can overplay one's hands or can have agendas which are not. But on this occasion, I think the opposition leader is quite correct in saying that we ought not to take that instance and say it is something against Hindus. And the proof is that other religions have had criminals who have gone to places of worship. You all may recall Father Harvey in St. Joseph. He was boarded by two criminals and he was almost physically harmed. We've had people interfering with mosques. We've had very many Christian places affected. So to say that what has happened, I think there are about 5 or 6 instances of people interfering with places of worship. And the opposition leader was right when she said they are either criminals looking for opportunity on a soft target, or people who are mentally disturbed or drug addicts. And I think that is what it is. So on this occasion, I don't have a problem with what the opposition leader has said, because that's what it is as far as I'm concerned. And to say that in our country, people are targeting other people because of their religion, I can't say that because I don't live that. I mean, I grew up in this country. I mean, I'm a Methodist by baptism. I was raised by Seventh-day Adventists. I went to an Anglican school. I married a Catholic, and I manage Hindus and Muslims at work. And a lot of my friends, I run a political party, and I have friends across the board. So I cannot subscribe to this thing about one group attacking another group because of their religion. What we have are criminals and petty criminals carrying out criminal conduct at places of worship, and that must stop. The police must make every effort to find out who is doing that and stop it, and it must not be used to label and stain our country.
Dr. Rowley, Doris Polo, CNC3. Now, CARICOM issued a statement on the Guyana versus Venezuela dispute as it relates to Essequibo. And what the statement did was identify the language that was used by Venezuela by all means and according to or with the law. And considering the carve-out that you mentioned that the U.S. provided to Trinidad for us to pursue the dragon gas deal, do you have any concerns about the growing conflict threatening this arrangement that the U.S. would have provided?
I don't see a close connection, and conflict always have the potential to change courses of things. So we're better off if it wasn't happening. But I don't really see that at this stage it provides any pathway that is requiring, any overly concern. But we would just rather that it's not happening. They're not connected as closely as you might put it there. Trinidad and Tobago is pursuing its interests with its friendly neighbor. If that neighbor has a problem with another neighbor, that's another issue. And we will have a position, but they're not, how should I put it, unevenly yoked permanently. The issue with Venezuela and Guyana is an ongoing one. It's been going on for a long time, and we hope that someday soon that it can come to some amicable end. And of course, the elections are coming up in Venezuela, and we'll hear all kinds of issues. So let us not overplay our response and our hand on it.
Prime Minister, good afternoon to you. Urvashi from TV6. You did speak about the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Now, the Israeli ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago, he of course said or suggested that there may be Hamas operatives across the world. Is that particularly of concern to us?
I can't speak to that. I mean, terrorist activity is something that we have been living with since 9/11, or even before that. And we're hoping that it is not so, but I don't know that we can say it is so. I have not seen any evidence of Hamas across the world. What I do know is that Hamas exists and is carrying out its purpose in one way or the other. But I simply want to say, though, that even though Hamas exists and some people label it a terrorist organization, humans' behavior to other human beings, there ought to be limits of inhumanity. So I think we should start there. The reason for doing something must have a base level. And of course, the same thing goes to the Israeli response. But once you have the conflict, the potential for excess in the inhumane behavior is there. And the Israeli ambassador, he might know something that I don't know, because information available to him is not available to me. But we are alert to the fact that terrorism is a matter of the world in which we live in today.
On another note, as it relates to the Dragon gas field, do we have an estimate as to when we expect first gas, and what exactly is projected? A platform in TNT waters to send across gas to ELNG Point Lisa?
Until we get the license, we can't really put a date on first gas, because there are some things you can't do before you have the license. You start counting to first gas from when you get the license, and then you can work out the engineering lead time that you need. The platform already exists. One of the reasons why Dragon attracted our attention is that we in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a platform, the Hibiscus platform, which is 17 kilometers from the field. So it's not so much a platform, it's a pipeline. It is, getting the wells operational, drilling new wells, and building a pipeline. This is not the kind of thing that will take overly long. As a matter of fact, when we did get the first agreement with Venezuela, we were looking at a 2.5-year arrangement. And had it not been interfered with by the sanctions, we would have had, that gas would have been flowing a long time. So as soon as we get the license and we start counting from there, then we'd be in a better position to tell you when, that first gas. But whenever that is, that would be a good day for us. Whatever that day is.
You have a very busy schedule. You mentioned Dubai, the CARICOM summit with Saudi Arabia, as well as going to London. Any news about the meeting between government officials and the opposition for crime talks?
Nothing new. We've put something in place. Initially, there was some reaction to that. I hope that was just an initial reaction. What I did put in place was, okay, let's talk. The issue, as far as I am concerned, as far as I'm aware, is that parliamentarians have not been able to agree on legislative approaches and legislative contributions to the crime fight. You would have seen us in the parliament on many occasions not being able to get opposition support. I mean, the opposition goes out of its way to not support government's position because they believe if crime is rampant in the country, it's good for their politics. So they go out of their way to not support anything that they believe could improve that situation, even though they talk with mealy mouth about how much crime in the country and how much that. So the parliamentarians agreed to meet. What I did, we agreed that it was going to be after the budget. I saw objections even before the budget, while the budget was going on. I saw objections that we had not done this, we had not done that. And I thought they were just looking for reasons to object. However, I have identified our 4 people who can meet with their 4 people. And I've also suggested to them that the Attorney General be the convener of the group of 8, 4 on our side, 4 on the other. I see objections to the Attorney General. No, I don't really have time to play games with the opposition, honest to God. Because if you're objecting to a chairman, who you want to chair? The opposition? And then, of course, a big issue about you want the public to be in on it. This is a matter for parliamentarians. You can go and find whoever you want to advise you and to get your ideas, but to sit down on the legislative agenda and legislative agreement, that's a matter for parliamentarians. So the Attorney General would attempt to convene, and if they're serious about talking about the legislative, and you would have seen when I was written to by the opposition leader, she wrote me a 7-page missive. 2 pages was cussing me, 1 page cussing the government, and the other 3 pages praising herself. I didn't bother with that. When I responded, I listed all the legislative things that were outstanding or areas where we can try to find common ground. Because basically that's what it is. I didn't spend any time talking about, what happened when they were in government and how much people dead. Those are issues that not going to help us focus on moving the needle on the legislative items that were not being supported. So I hope, frankly, I hope that the people would meet. I don't have to be there. I've put 4 members of the cabinet to be there because the issues are not issues because I am there. And of course, the government and the opposition, they're parliamentary colleagues discussing national issues. And if they find something to bring forward, then they bring it forward to the government, to the cabinet, to the prime minister, and hopefully it comes to the parliament where we have some agreement. Then something would have been accomplished. But telling me about if I'm not there is a signal that I'm not concerned about crime and foolishness. I'm not in that.
Prime Minister, as it relates to those very anti-crime talks, do you think it'll serve the national interest a little better if it was just you and the opposition leader, as opposed to these teams? Because we all see what happens in Parliament.
You see, this is not personal. The opposition leader I know loves to get personal with people. This is state business. We have legislative agreements, decisions to make. The government has a position. Parliament is where parliamentarians do the business of the people, representing the people. If you don't want to cooperate in the parliament, where's the cooperation going to be? And I don't have to be chummy with the opposition leader to get her to do something. I want her to do her job. When you tell me that something is good when you're in government, but it's not good when you're in opposition, you're just playing the fool. And it's not only about crime. You saw it with the classic is the Caribbean Court of Justice. It's a political approach of politics which is harming the national good. It's just too much playing politics. I must tell you, politics is good. And politicians get involved in politics. But there comes a time when you have to put the public interest first. And I stand behind this podium leading a team that voted for the budget in 2015 from the opposition because I put the public interest first. So if the opposition wants to put the public interest first, they will meet with the government and we discuss the legislative obstacles and see if we can find common ground. If we can't do that, then the criminals will feel that they're winning the fight because politicians put politics in front, and this thing about call the election now, it's not all about election. It's not about election. It's about living in this country. How do we confront and put the disadvantage on the side of the criminals and give the advantage to the law-abiding citizens? That's what it's all about. So it's not personal. I'm not getting involved in this personalities about me and the opposition leader. I'm not in any competition with the opposition leader. I lead an organization. I run the government. I have parliamentary colleagues. That's how it is.
Dr. Rowley, what is your view on the $55 million that was spent for the building that was not occupied by the DPP?
You really want to know?
Yep.
I must say, I am very disappointed, hugely disappointed. And I think that something has to be radically wrong, where the Parliament, in inquiring about the performance of certain government departments, could be told over and over that the reason why you can't function is because we don't have staff. And the reason why we don't have staff is because I know where to put them. And the government heard that because the government was being accused of not providing the wherewithal for the department to function. But the government wants it to function. And of course, the government did the best that the government could do, which was to find executive office. That office was the executive headquarters of a bank. So you could imagine the level of comfort that exists in there. The government agreed to pay the high rental for that property. It's not cheap, because high-class executive office in Port of Spain is not cheap. We entered into a contract for it, a 3-year contract. We had to outfit it to suit the department that was going to go in there. We did all that. Then we heard that there were security issues. We spent money strengthening the security. Bulletproof in here, this, that, there. We did all of that. At the end of the day, after we spent $55 million, a public servant could decide, I'm not going in there. Something has to be wrong with that. Something has to be wrong with that. And as a taxpayer, I'm incensed that that could have happened in Trinidad and Tobago.
Do you think, Dr. Rowley, that maybe the location and the crime situation, that within that period of time from when they would have first said yes and then to the present day, that if there's been a perception of worsening of crime?
I have seen so-called reports from Special Branch, which is no justification for that waste. And I, as a public official, I too am exposed to matters of risk and personal security. I do not know what the threat is to that particular office, which only exists when you're in that office. Because you use the roads, you use the market, you use the church, you're in your home. How come $55 million of risk only exists in that corner of that building? You know, I don't want to get into any fight with anybody, right? And I don't want to get into any disturbing conversation, but I just find that this is unacceptable. And the government did everything that the government could do. And as I speak to you now, nobody has justified to me how this happened, except that a public officer decided, I am not going in that building. I've seen the security reports. In the end, the landlord had to say, do not do anything further to my building. 3 years was up. We're on a month-to-month contract. And in the end, what do? And the reason why we hired that building for that office is because we said, if that is what it takes for the office to function, we'll pay the price. I've seen it said, okay, put another government office in there. That is not the kind of office you put another government office in. It's not a question of, okay, if that office doesn't go in, put this one in, because we're not going to pay that price for other government offices. That's not normal. And that tells me that this whole question about who runs this country, who's in charge in this country, should be of concern to the population. Because if that could happen with that office, does this set a precedent for other officers? That you're working for the government, you don't like the building, you don't feel safe, so I'm not going in there. $55 million. Because once we entered into the contract to provide the office, that money had to be flowing. And then all these months, toing and froing, until the contract ended without the building being occupied for 1 day.
Can I ask a question on that? At some point, because to me, 55 million, the government could have bought a building.
Of course.
With that money. So at some point, didn't it dawn on somebody that money was being poured into an investment?
It wasn't an investment. It was a contract for occupancy. We had a contract with the landlord. And we also spent significant sums of money up front. The outfitting of the building. When you rent a building, you rent the shell. And then you go in and you spend money. That 55 million, a significant amount of it is on the outfitting. Right? So you're not saying, okay, well, all right, you could just walk away and leave it. But you have a contract. If you walk away, you still have a lease to pay. And of course, if you outfit it, you would have spent the money. It is just wrong, wrong, wrong. And no amount of justification, right, could convince me that something is very wrong here. Very, very wrong.
I just want to. You said the initial contract was for 3 years.
And then it went into, after that, for a short period, month to month. And we had to make a decision. Since, before it went into, I think, before it went into month to month, or just about, an instruction to proceed to occupy the building was given. And the instruction was disobeyed. You might ask me, well, how come? I could just tell you, as head of the government, head of the cabinet, with the Ministry of Finance paying the money, I have no authority over JLSC staff. The Judicial and Legal Service Commission, right, ought to explain this to the country. The staff that was supposed to go in there is JLSC staff. The government provide taxpayers' money for executive offices. There were issues raised, the government addressed them. The long and short of the story is that the money was wasted. And as a taxpayer, I am not pleased about that. And I want to know who will be the next officer to decide that they're not going into the government office. And what was the real reason why that building was not used? If one corner of the building is exposed to a threat, does that mean the whole building is exposed to the threat? If one floor is exposed to a threat, the south, the east, the north, look, I just don't want to talk about this anymore.
Could I ask in relation to that, as you raised the point about public servants and so on, the issue of the Registrar General Office and what happened in Tobago, where a senior, well, based on the report, a senior officer took the decision that they would not take instructions from the overall head in Trinidad. This whole issue of how autonomy for Tobago is being interpreted is finding itself in this maze where there are these situations where there's this stalemate and no progress. You know, what can be done to review maybe the act, or to define what autonomy for Tobago means? Because you had a situation where the officer, the Registrar General representative, was locked out of the office in Tobago, and the public was being allowed in. So I mean,
what is happening? I think you're touching on a problem that exists. It's a fuzzy line between the political conversation and the administrative actions. There are people in political office in Tobago who are taking the position that there's some bruising dichotomy between the THA and its executive authority and the central government, and they're competing for Tobago. That conversation is not confined only to the political voices. It is finding itself garnering support from people who may be in office, other than the political office. They may be in public office. And if that is so, and those persons think that they can be guided by that political narrative and act it out, then you could get problems like that. And these things don't usually come as explosions, they come creeping. You would have seen before where there was a situation in Tobago where the licensing officers went to Tobago and did a street exercise. And in that exercise, they happened to have picked up an officer's wife and that was dealt with in a particular way. I watch all these things, I don't say anything, I just watch it. The next thing you know is that the licensing officers were described as invaders from Trinidad who are not welcome in Tobago, and la 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 la, and they were in fact locked out of the licensing office in Tobago. You saw that? And then the Tobago politicians started questioning the authority of the licensing and transport department in Tobago. And they went as far as to say that insofar as they have any presence in Tobago or authority in Tobago, it is an oppression of the people of Tobago. That is the conversation. But to come back to your question on the particular matter that you raised about the Registrar General's office, again, this, I think, is a public service shortcoming, because I do not know that this particular thing has anything to do with any autonomy. The law exists. If it is to be changed, then we work towards changing it. But you work with the law as it exists. The Tobago Registrar General's office is a part of the wider Registrar General's office of Trinidad and Tobago. This news came to me from the media, where I was being told that somebody in Trinidad locked out the Tobago office from the infrastructure to generate service to the people of Tobago. I became immediately concerned, right? Because that is what I was told, and that's how it was sold, that central government said that Tobago office didn't have any proper authority to continue providing these services and had locked them out of the computer. I immediately took action to find out and to rectify that, only to discover that it wasn't so at all. It was an officer in Tobago who, struggling with the system, was invited to Trinidad for training. That officer, instead of responding to that reasonable situation, decided to determine that you can't tell me that because you are Trinidad public servant and my instruction come from Tobago PS. No, I just had a meeting with the head of the public service to find out if the public service has gone mad. Because this is not a singular arrangement. First we had other situations, we know we have this, and only today I heard about another one where public servants deciding that a particular ministry cannot function in the government office because that public servant doesn't recognize the minister's authority to do that. I mean, something is very wrong, and I have asked the Attorney General for guidance so that the government could speak to the Public Service Commission. So whatever Kool-Aid they're drinking, they better understand that we are all here to serve the public. That inconvenience to the people of Tobago that occurred there ought never to have happened, because all the arrangements were in place for the people of Tobago to have a continuous service. And everybody who was inconvenienced by that is owed an apology from the Public Service Commission, because these staff members are members under the Public Service Commission, and people are just taking the position, right, that they could do whatever they please because there are no consequences. And apparently when the PNM is in office, everybody bad. Everybody bad when the PNM is in office. I have spoken today. You can imagine, the government comes to an agreement with Tutor to deal with the 4% to pay. We said we know it's not the best that we could that you look for, but get it as quickly as you can and you use it as quickly as you can. That's an agreement, public. The Minister of Finance comes to the Parliament and tells the Parliament that he will find the money and will take steps to ensure that public servants are paid by Christmas, by December. A PS is going to write the minister and tell the minister that that can't be done until next year, May? Well, they don't run this country. They never offered themselves for public service. And the cabinet will not tolerate that.
Public servants getting the money for the Christmas?
I just told you. A PSN no. Next year, May might be earliest. There's a government in this country, right? And the government will do what has to be done.
What do you think of the decision of the THA Secretary for Infrastructure to charter a private jet without any discussion with his boss or the executive council? Can a minister do that in your cabinet?
Of course a minister can do that, but there'll be consequences. It's all part of the general foolishness that's going on. And until somebody gets into real trouble, they will continue. That gentleman is the man who says that the EMA has no authority in Tobago and proceed to do all kinds of things in Tobago with the full support of the Chief Secretary, that the EMA doesn't have any authority in Tobago. And all of this is being done in a conversation that Tobago is not prepared to subject itself to the laws that govern the central government and the existing autonomy of Tobago. Because don't fool yourself, there is autonomy in Tobago. It might not be to the extent that is desirable or desired, but the executive in Tobago has serious responsibility. Right? What happened there with that gentleman is a matter for the Civil Aviation Department. Because I don't know since when anybody in this country is allowed to come into the country by commercial transport provided by people who are not licensed to do it. These are things that look like small things to some people, but these are major developments, because the information that I've seen is that the aircraft had no authority to bring paying passengers into Trinidad and Tobago. But a member from the assembly, an executive member of the country, could do that. And of course, it's Tobago. We're allowed to apply there. But I trust that it's all a learning experience for all of us.
Mr. Prime Minister, electricity rates are set to increase. The RIC has pronounced. Now, we're hearing from some economists who suggest that inflation will rise because of the increase in commercial rates. You know, food inflation will also rise because supermarkets will have to pay more to refrigerate their goods and so on. Are you concerned about the overall health of the economy, one? And two, what is being put into place for alternative energy, for instance, solar energy, to allow persons to offset those costs by harnessing their own green energy?
Well, to answer the last part first, I think there's one more step to be done, which is to get the regulations in place to allow for surplus power to go into the grid. That is, the last time I checked, they were almost there with that. And once that is done, then the regulations will apply. You can generate your power and then be able to get it into the grid. But a grid that in countries where this is arm's length commercial, that makes sense. In a system like ours where there's subsidized power in surplus, I don't know what they will pay you for your additional. So that's the environment in which you'll operate for a while at least. But in terms of what's going to happen, now these things, the reason why the RIC exists, right? The Regulated Industries Commission. The reason why it exists is to deal with all those things that you just mentioned there. And all the emotion that would flow with respect to the charges that would apply to utilities. Because before that, you know what used to happen? In the free fall, when you had private electricity supply and private, you just charge, and it was felt that that is not the best way for the public to get value for money and get some element of protection. So there's a Regulated Industries Commission, which is not really guided by the government. It makes an independent assessment of the situation. Widespread consultation, and you saw how that went. Took a long time. taking into account all these factors. But there are changes. There are changes to be made. The population would be encouraged to accept that yesterday is not today, may not be tomorrow. There are changes, and the best thing we could do is to prepare ourselves, one, to benefit from yesterday, two, to make good decisions today, and three, to be prepared for tomorrow. Those are the 3 steps that we have to do as individual citizens. I know some people like the 5 minutes of fame and wave a flag. I'm in defense of the downtrodden and whatnot. We arrive at this position in a civil way. An independent commission looked at it. There is still going to be a significant subsidy on electricity in this country. And to shout loudly and say, I'm not going to pay it, well, that's an option. But of course, at the end of the day, the commission would have done its work and made recommendations to the government. And then the cabinet will look at these recommendations and determine what recommendations or what levels that the recommendations stand at. Because at the end of it, it would be the government taking on a responsibility, right, as to how much. In this country, I know it is quite normal for somebody to say that doesn't matter. Right now, as I speak to you, electricity in this country is still among the cheapest, and it's still a cheap product to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But the bottom line is, Tech that sells you that electricity cannot pay for the gas. Tech owes billions of dollars for the gas that it burns to provide the electricity. So let us stop pretending that is not so. And if we have to pay a little bit more, and I'm hoping it's a little bit more, stop pretending that this is the sky falling on our head. The gas, the price of the gas has gone up. The price of the gas is going up. And if Tech is to keep providing us with a reliable service, and I'm sure every one of us wants a reliable service. We don't want a rolling blackout. We don't want inefficiencies where you can't get supply. All over this country, people are being provided with what I consider to be a good service from Tech. But the circumstances are that Tech is not able to pay for the gas that is burning. The Minister of Finance pays that. The ability of the Minister of Finance to pay it is also being reduced. So if you are a consumer, fortunately, in electricity, in some situations, it is something that you may be able to do something about, a little bit, at the personal level. And of course, our commercial use of electricity in this country, if the price of the product has gone up, the demand for a cheaper product is only that. If it's available. The question is it available? So the cabinet will look at it. It's not before the cabinet is yet. The cabinet will look at what the RIC has put there, and it takes into account everything that you have said. How it's going to impact here, who's going to pay it there, who's going to get relief, who will have to pay a bit more without relief, and so on. The commercial enterprises are profit-making enterprises. They're in the business of making a profit. It is unrealistic for such entities to say to the government, so that I can make my profit, you will have to subsidize it. That is not a reasonable position. You have to find some way of coping with your input. And I would be very surprised if the voice of the commercial enterprises in Trinidad and Tobago is that because we have to pay a little bit more for electricity, we are now unprofitable. That is not what I expect. And I don't think that that is the situation. As a matter of fact, our CARICOM colleagues, especially Jamaica, had been on our throats for a long time, arguing that Trinidad and Tobago enjoys an unfair advantage in their market because we get such cheap electricity here. We manufacture here and then sell in their market when they're paying the full commercial price. Those are the realities. I know it's a conversation that makes some people feel that they're the heroes of the downtrodden, but the bottom line, what is the logic? Do we allow Tech to start having rolling blackouts because they can't pay the bills? I think the first thing is that how can we affordably maintain a sustainable quality service? And we all have to agree that is not going to be cheap and it's not going to be free. There will still be some significant element of subsidy. And you know something? I'm asking the Minister of Public Utilities, just for the health of the public and the conversation going forward. I don't know at what time it's going to happen. But we're going to talk to Tech and to the other utilities going forward that the real cost of these services must be put on the bill. And the subsidized cost that you pay must also be on the bill. So that you could see exactly what you're getting as against the old talk from people, some of them who know better, and will encourage you to rant and rave and misbehave. The real cost is $15, your cost $3. So you could see it, and then you have no excuse after that to be misled by people who would lead you astray. Right now, this country's position is that we should aim to be reasonable, to understand that things have changed or are changing, and prepare ourselves to do the best that we can do in a changed environment. I talked to you a while ago about gas. We are trying now to limit the amount of gas that we burn for electricity. That's why we go into solar and possibly some wind and so, because the gas that we don't burn, we can get it to Point Lisas, make it into fertilizer or some other petrochemical and sell that. That's what we have to do. Yeah? And if you're a light bill, if you are at the lowest end of the paying scale, there'll be some relief to go with that. If you are at the top, consuming large amount and making a profit, you are required to pay. We all have to share in it. We all have to share it. And that is what the RIC was meant to do. The RIC exists for that purpose. And politicians going and chasing them and accusing them of being government and being paid, and all them doing is playing the fool in this country and leading people astray. You'd be much better off understanding it properly and figuring out, how does this affect me personally? Is there anything I can do personally, or is it anything that I can do in terms of being ready for a changed environment? The worst thing could happen to anybody in this country is to find yourself in a changed environment, not being ready for that change. That's the worst thing that could happen to anybody in this country. Whether it's in education, in health, in retirement, the worst thing that could happen to you is that the environment is changing or has changed, and you are deciding that I am not going to respond to that. The government doesn't have that option. I can tell you, at the end of the day, regardless of what the rates are going to be in the final outcome, there will be a significant amount of support from the government to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And there's no better way of showing it than showing it on your bill when it comes to you. So you'll see what the real cost is, right? As against what you are actually being asked to pay. And I wouldn't mention that around, within CARICOM where we compete, there are people paying the full pay. As a matter of fact, in one very prominent CARICOM country, there's a tax on it, on the bill, as a revenue raiser. Over and above paying the cost you pay, they put a tax on it to raise additional revenue. We don't do that in Trinidad and Tobago. So let us not miss what is happening to us. 2023 is not 1963.
You just mentioned ranting, raving, and misbehaving. The opposition member, Wade Mark, I think he was speaking in the Senate, if I remember correctly, when he called on the government to not only withdraw the proposal by the RIC to not implement this price hike for electricity, but also he warned that the country could see a riot taking place.
Wade Mark loves a riot. he would love a riot. Is that so? That's what he's saying? Well, when this country decide to riot, we'll be in Mark. Right? We reach. Huh?
Is it things like a public awareness campaign on electricity savings? Because there was a time when one of the opposition people called the government the light bulb gang when you were introducing the white light bulbs, but actually it has had quite a big saving. But if you could continue the momentum.
But there are many people who couldn't be bothered to take the bulbs. There are many people, the bulbs were available so that you burn less electricity. And you'd be surprised that there were people who, when offered the bulbs at the point of payment, refused to accept it. So it takes a while for those things to work themselves into the system, you know. But I do not think that we will come to the point where there'll be any riot in Trinidad and Tobago over electricity rate, because it is not that kind of situation. And to the extent that Mark is promising a riot, Mark has never meant anything good for this country. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
I mean, just as a citizen, part of the change environment includes we've had extremely hot days, and there's been an increased use of air conditioning. There's a need for it because so many of the buildings were built for that system to operate. And I mean, we're making a change. You're asking us to make a change now, but we've already invested a lot in infrastructure where it requires. Well, we as a people, we as a government, we as a people, private citizens, and so on.
Well, again, at the time when you made those investments, I don't think we were talking about having 35 degrees for a week and so on. But how permanent is that? We're in the middle of the rainy season. Maybe it will cool down, maybe it wouldn't. But the bottom line is, if there's a change circumstance, then you're required to be able to identify that the circumstance is changing. Many people who have air condition, there may be ways of using air condition more efficiently. I still go up to Mocha and see the school light up whole night still. Right? I think that bill is paid by I don't know who pays that bill, but the school is still bright right through the night. There's no law that says that. There are technologies that could allow you to have the light turned on and off in the face of a motion. But so far, we in Trinidad and Tobago have not been able to make those changes because, notwithstanding what you're hearing, there's no push factor away from the current consumption pattern. I mean, you're coming over the road there, flying into the airport, looking, playing field light up 4.5. Nobody on playing field doing nothing. And of course, they might tell you, well, we need the light because we have a crime problem, so you need to see us. But the bottom line is that there are things that we could do to minimize the effect at the national level and sometimes at the personal level. Right? And also, rest assured that the government will not put a burden in such a way that we believe that the population can't cope with it. We will try to make it as palatable as possible, because our utilities are still heavily subsidized. And that is one of the benefits we get from making our own adjustments in Trinidad and Tobago and staying away from IMF programs.
Excuse me, Prime Minister. Alina Dunas from Loop News. I just wanted to touch on the
name and the entity.
Alina Dunas from Loop News.
Loop still exists?
Yes. Just wanted to touch on property tax. Some people have been concerned about maybe rent prices going up. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, and also with regard to the Rental Assessment Board, if there were any comments or thoughts with regard to that.
Well, again, first and foremost, if you don't have property, then you have no tax to pay. If you are a tenant, I think landlords would still price their tenants. Tenants are hard to get, and I think the average landlord would not want to drive his tenant out by increasing his rent because of property tax. I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation of property tax, deliberately so, where people were led to believe that it would be this humongous tax based on the value of property. It is not so. The Minister of Finance has done this over and over and over, and the numbers are numbers that we believe are manageable. And to the extent that there are people who have genuine problems, provision would be made for that, for those exemptions. So let us not overdo it. We are going through a period of change, and those changes are not all painless, but they are for the better. Thank you all very much, and hope to see you again sometime soon.
This is TTT. Live for local.